Thank you everybody for coming to our last session with the presentation by Professor Magdaleno Marco, who will talk today about psychosocial risks with a particular emphasis on job stress. I assume you have followed these talks throughout the week, so you know how to proceed. If you want to make a question, feel free to raise your hand at any point or write your question in the chat. And or we can ask the questions at the end as you prefer. Without more interruptions, I will let Professor Magdaleno Marco to do his presentation. Thank you again for everything. If you want your certificate of participation, please contact Erato at the university for that, and let's get started.
Thank you very much, Professor Duval. And thank you again, the Open University of Cyprus, for hosting me to do these lectures at his premises in Cyprus. And we are going to talk today about job stress, a very huge concept, as well as the huge concepts that we have been seeing and talking about this week. So this is another of the big topics that I wanted to talk about with you. So let's get started. Imagine an employee who experiences some symptoms like tachycardia, muscle pain, difficulty to concentrate in his task, insomnia, irritability, depressed mood, guilt. Do you think that it is an unusual situation, and in any case, that it must be temporary? What happens when an employee goes to his boss and say, "I'm stressed"? The certain thing is that still today there is a huge lack of awareness and concern about this issue. Even when we are starting talking at the European level about this problem, this huge problem that we have in our workplace, in almost every organization, we have stressed employees. So what you saw before was a sample of symptoms that stressed employees can have. So we still need to work a lot in this direction to promote health in the workplace. Because the mentioned symptoms are only a small part of those that the person with stress can actually suffer. If you see here, we have classified the different symptoms in physical in the first place. We can have cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal, muscular, dermatological disorders, and sexual dysfunctions. That's only for physical, but for core cognitive symptoms, we have disorders of attention, memory and concentration, general decrease in performance, increased number of mistakes made, inability to finish one task before starting another, not knowing where to start, feeling out of control, negative thoughts. And that's not necessarily going to happen to the employees, all the symptoms at once, but the employees with stress can suffer some of these symptoms at the same time, okay? Not necessarily all of them, but some. Behavioral symptoms we have as well, changes in life habits, eating, work, leisure, insomnia, apathy, clumsiness, increased consumption of alcohol, tobacco and drugs, propensity for accidents. In the emotional area, we have also symptoms like impatience, irritability, fear, anxiety, depressed mood, anger, hostility, worry, guilt. But the thing is that stress can also damage the organization because it can negatively influence the work environment in the first place, generally speaking, job performance, and then organizational results as a consequence. It can cause absenteeism. Stressed employees will be more likely not going to work. Presenteeism, which means that the employee is at the workplace, but in his mind, he's not in the workplace. He's thinking about something else. Harassment, burnout syndrome. We are going to talk a little bit about burnout syndrome later. So, due to the importance and prevalence, we are going to focus on job stress as the main psychosocial risk. There are other, like burnout, like violence, like sexual harassment, like bullying. But because of the prevalence and the importance and the intenseness of the symptoms, we are going to focus on stress. In fact, the European opinion poll conducted recently by the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work shows that about a half of workers consider the problem with work-related stress to be common in their workplace. Not only that they suffer stress, but that they think that it is a common thing at their workplace. Okay, so it is very, very extensive. So simply taking a look at the possible consequences and prevalence of stress on employees and organizations, the study of stress is more than justified. So what is job stress? Job stress has been defined as a pattern of emotional, cognitive, physiological, and behavioral reactions to certain adverse and noxious aspects of work content, work organization, and the work environment. So it is a reaction from our physiology, from our mind, and from our behavior to something that happens in the environment, and we react in a very intense way. And in most cases, in a non-proportional way. It is a state characterized by high levels of arousal and response. Arousal, remember that it equals to activation, physiological activation. Stress is associated with the frequent feeling of not being able to cope. It is a bad thing nowadays, but originally it had a positive function in nature because we need to react to a stressor, like for example the zebra that you see in the picture, was stressed when it saw the lion approaching. So it needed to be stressed because if it wasn't stressed, probably it would be dead. So the stress originally was a good thing because it activates us in front of a stressor that we need to do something about it, either if it's fleeing or fighting. We have a general model of job stress to understand it a little bit. It can be understood as a result of a discrepancy between the demands that the job puts on the employee, the requirements of the job, what the organization asks you to do, and on the other hand, the personal resources that the employee has. So when there's a discrepancy and the demands are much higher than the personal resources that we can put on the table, we can suffer this discrepancy, which can originate the stress experience. The stress experience is divided into a primary appreciation or primary phase, in which we realize that there is a stress situation, and the secondary phase in which we analyze the resources that we have and the strategies that we could use to overcome those problems, right? The next phase, would be coping. If we are in front of a stressor, we tend to do something. Unless we feel so paralyzed that we don't, normally we do something, and that's the coping part of the model. We implement our strategies, either if they are good or bad to deal with a stressor, and we expect to see some improvement of the situation. If our coping is not good enough for the situation, we suffer the results that the results can even turn into consequences. We are going to talk in the next slide about the difference between results and consequences, but they are both outcomes of the stress situation. The different phases of the model can be modulated in its intents by different variables, like for example, environmental variables, like you see on the top. Social support can be a very strong modulating variable in the sense that if you have a good social support network, the consequences of the stressor are going to be less intense for you. The decision-making capacity, the capacity to react properly, etc. And on the other hand, we have the personal variables that can also modulate the situation, like the self-esteem, locus of control, personality, values, self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, as you know from a previous lecture, refers to the mastery in a certain task that we believe to have. So if we feel self-efficacious about doing something, we will probably succeed in a much higher way than if we don't. The difference between results and consequences, as I was anticipating, is sometimes not clear, but for practical reasons, we make this distinction. Results are short-term and consequences are long-term. Results are mild because they come first, but if they get chronified, they can become severe in intensity. Results are most of all physiological, psychological, and behavioral, and consequences are more they develop diseases, alterations in well-being and mental health, and behavioral changes become more great, more intense, and have worse consequences. So, what can stress us in our jobs? There are different classifications of work stresses. I'm going to go with this one that differentiate between the ones that we are going to see in the next slides. The first would be the stressors that come from the physical environment and the content of the job. Starting with the obvious thing. If we talk about the physical environment, of course there are things that are going to be stressing us, like the noise when it's very loud, the vibrations in certain jobs, the bad lighting, the temperature when it's not right, when it's too high or when it's too low, the toxicity of certain jobs, of the air that you're breathing, the climate, if you work in an open area, and space issues, for example, working in a very narrow space, that can be stressful. In the image you see the example of miners. It can also be related to the content of the job, like working by shifts. That could be very stressing. Shift work refers to changing shifts. Like, for example, you work 1 week in the morning, the next week you work in the afternoon, and the next week you work at night. The work overload. This is probably the number one cause, the most extended, and the one that is normally the cause of job stress, right? When someone has too much work to do. Job characteristics, like for example, when we have too much autonomy for one job, they delegate everything on us and we don't know what to do. And when we have not enough autonomy to do the tasks that we are supposed to do. So you can see that they can stress when they are over or under the optimate level. The same for a variety of the tasks that you are doing, about the feedback that you get from the job, etc. There are also stressors that derive from the roles that you do in the company. Like role ambiguity, not knowing what to do in your job. This is very common for newcomers in a job. Someone that hasn't been explained exactly what to do and why, what is the purpose of their jobs. Like, for example, you feel ambiguous about the objectives, the tasks, you don't know what to do, you don't know about the instruments, how to use your tools, your instruments, okay? It can be also related to conflict between roles. For example, in-role conflict, when you, for example, have certain values that go against the values of the company. If you are pro-environmental person and you work in a gas company, for example, or between roles conflict, when you have superiors and at the same time you have subordinates, and you have to satisfy demands that come from both groups at the same time. And sometimes it can be even different what they ask for and not easily compatible. You can have stressors from interpersonal relationships. First of all, from supervisors. This is the most common of these. Supervisors can stress us, of course. There can be situations of favoritism, of being closely supervised, of suffering autocratic style of leadership, leader who is always watching and supervising you and telling you exactly what to do and not letting you any autonomy. But the opposite would be also stressful, laissez-faire leadership style that is characterized by a leader not doing basically anything and letting you do anything you want, but also not communicating what to do, not giving you the tools to work, and basically ignoring you. It can be from collaborators also. There can be conflict between the results and the consideration, what I was talking before, when you have to get the equilibrium between the organization's interests and having consideration with your employees. The conflict between the formal and the real power when you don't get the respect that you expect from your employees, the erosion of authority, maybe you don't get to your employees to do what you want to do, to make them do. It can also come from peers, like for example, the competitiveness in certain jobs, when your peers don't support you and don't help you, when there is a lack also of relationships in very isolated kind of jobs. And the stressors in this category can also come from clients or users. In itself, it is stressful, usually. So, because the clients and users are normally demanding things from you, and this is more critical in healthcare. Actually, stress and burnout were initially studied in nurses because it is a sector that is traditionally very stressed and very burnt out. Clients with problems that splatter you, and I'm thinking also of healthcare. That can be a very demanding job and can be very stressful. The stressors can also come related to the career development. It can come from lack of security at your job, uncertainty, instability of your work situation. Maybe the company is in a crisis and nobody in the company knows what is going to happen, not only you, but everyone. The stress here can also come from an inadequate promotion. Maybe when you get promoted under your expectations, or when you don't get promoted at all, but also when you get over promoted, when you don't feel competent enough to develop a specific job, and you just don't know what to do at that level, and you don't feel qualified. That can also be a stressor. The stressors can also come from the structure and the organizational climate. Regarding the structure, too much centralization or too much formalization can be a stressor. When there is a certain department that has to do a lot of the tasks that the organization has to do, and they don't have enough people, and everybody has to get their job done, that could be a problem of centralization. Or formalization, when there are too many rules, when everything is written and you don't even know where to find the exact rule or the exact procedure to do a specific task. Regarding the climate, there can be organizations that lack participation for the employees, where employees are never asked about their opinion. There can be feelings of dehumanization in certain companies, or there can be political games, like a Game of Thrones in an organization. This is always very stressful. There can be stressors also related to the use of new technologies. Regarding the implementation, because it always demands training needs, it can be alienating for older generations that are not so familiar with new technologies, or the ambiguity of function, right? Since it's a new thing to apply in the job, maybe majority of the people don't know exactly how it works, and they can suffer mistakes, technological mistakes that they don't know how to overcome, etc. Telework nowadays is very common, very popular. It also has its inconveniences, like, for example, reduced social contacts, difficulties for coordination and communication, etc. And finally, there can be stressors that are related to work in one way or another, but that happen outside work or are spilled over to the family life. Family problems, for example, personal crises, economic problems that have the origin at our job and spill over the family sphere, the problems with disconnecting after work, the digital disconnection, especially when we are teleworking, and in general spillover issues. So once we have seen the possible stressors at work, what can we do? What can we do to get a better situation? I'm talking from an organizational point of view. Well, some of these strategies may sound familiar to you because we have been talking about intervention in other organizational spheres, and some of them can be common because if you try to lower job stress, you are at the same time rising well-being. They can be considered in some way opposite. So some of them may sound familiar for that reason. Uh, for example, you can try to improve environmental conditions. This can be applicable most of all to works that suffer from the first kind of stressors that I was explaining, the ones that are related to the physical conditions, of course. Change the physical working conditions. If you work or your workers work in a place with a lot of noise, try to solve that. The same as for lighting or toxicity of the air. Intervene on physical stressors. Job enrichment can also be a strategy to lower the stress at work. Try to improve the job characteristics. Like, for example, if you have stress in your employees derived from low autonomy, try to fix that by designing or redesigning the jobs by providing them with more autonomy, with more freedom to decide. For example, you can try to delegate some of the jobs or tasks that someone on the top is doing, and that can be a way to overcome that lack of autonomy. Give variety of tasks, always accompanied with the necessary training, right? Identity, feedback. Provide with feedback to your employees to make them develop. Semi-autonomous work groups. This could be a good idea also to handle the stress by enhancing the social support, the interactiveness, and that could work for companies that need teamwork and autonomous teamwork. Less supervision, and more autonomous results. Autonomy to decide on how to do the job, little supervision, etc. We could try to apply changes in working hours as well, like, for example, modify the schedule. If it's something related to the shifts, you can try to design the shifts in another way that is less stressful for the employees. We can try to train our employees in time management. Some employees really waste their time because they manage their time in an inappropriate way. So give training about time management. Help them how to prioritize their tasks. Sometimes employees go with a task that is not important and that is not urgent. So make them realize what is important and urgent. Delegation, perception of urgency, all these issues can be trained. Management styles. We have been talking about leadership in the previous presentations. We can try to manage by objectives, and that would be uh, reducing the supervision, the direct control of supervisors on employees. That would help to reduce the supervision-related stress. Set goals, as I was saying yesterday. Set SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Democratic styles like, for example, transformational leadership. Try to raise participation. Ask your employees about the important decisions that you are going to make in your organization. Believe in the employee's potential, basically. Career plans. Design an employee's company commitment. Jointly establish goals with your employees. Sit with your employees and try to design their career in order to have them know what they can achieve in your organization. And they can also help you to design the planification of the staff of your company. It can be a good relationship for both to make career plans. Training and support, personalized profile with personal capabilities and which jobs you aspire to. I mean, each employee is what do they individually want in their company? Ask them what they want in 5 years' time, how they see themselves. There are other aspects related to HR management that can have an influence on job stress and the workplace, and how these practices are implemented are going to have outcomes on that. Like, for example, personnel selection. Some of the problems that we find at our workplace and stress situations have the origin at selection process. Because at selection, we need to make sure that we find the best fit between the job and the person, the candidate. If we do that in an incorrect way, we are probably going to end up with a situation of a stressed employee. Maybe because the person is not doing what he really wants, maybe because he was expecting something else, maybe because he doesn't have the necessary tools or qualifications, maybe because he has too much qualification for this job, etc., etc. Try to socialize your employees in a proper way so they don't feel ambiguity role, like I was explaining before. Make them build their social relations in their company from day one, so they build this social support that is so important, and we have been seeing it all this week. Training, give the necessary training to your employees. In some companies, they just throw their new employees to the staff, to their working place, and they don't even explain the main duties or the most important duties that they have to do and how to do them. Performance appraisals. We saw the other day that the importance of the performance appraisals and how they are done can have a lot of consequences for the workplace. And this can be very stressful if we do performance appraisals for administrative and making decisions at the organization level process. Compensation system. This can be very stressful if there are inequities, but this is probably the most obvious point of this slide. Of course, this is regulated by law, so this shouldn't be an issue. So far we have talked a little bit about job stress because, as I was saying, it's the most important or more extended psychosocial risk at work in Europe and all over the world. But I didn't want to finish my presentation of today without talking a little bit about the burnout syndrome, which can be considered, and literature considers in that way, the prolongation in time of job stress. When job stress is chronified in a certain employee or in a certain team also, it can become burnout. and we have a syndrome. We are not talking about psychosocial risk anymore. We are talking about a syndrome, a disease. This is mental health what we are talking about. What is burnout? Burnout was defined as a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. And is defined by the three dimensions of emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. So when we have job stress for a long time, we might be vulnerable to suffer burnout syndrome. The first dimension of burnout is emotional exhaustion. This is the main dimension, and sometimes burnout syndrome is defined by just this dimension because of its importance. When you hear someone say, I'm emotionally exhausted, I can't do anything else in this job, I just can't. Expressions like this reveal employees emotionally exhausted, that they can't do anything more to raise their performance. They can't really deal with the demands of the job. It is defined as feelings of being emotionally overextended and exhausted by one's work. This is more visible, as I was saying, in healthcare. Um, this is also this was also started to be studied at nurses in the collective of nurses, because they suffer from burnout syndrome a lot, because they deal with very demanding users, because ill people are very demanding users for professionals. So this was what we first see in these people suffering from this syndrome. Secondly, we have cynicism, that is defined as the unfeeling and impersonal response toward recipients of one's service, care, treatment, or instruction. When you start to see your employees to act in an impersonal way to the customers or users, when you see that they treat them like a number, not as a human being, this is what cynicism is about. And also, this is seen more in healthcare. I think we all have seen nurses or doctors treating the ill people just not as important as it should be, right? This is the cynicism factor of burnout. And finally, we have inefficacy, which is defined as the feelings of competence and successful achievement in one's work, but in a negative way. I mean, low feelings of competence, you should say. When a person is not performing right, this is low performance, in other words, we can say that this person is suffering from the inefficacy factor of burnout syndrome. So when we have someone that says that he can't deal anymore with the job, that is treating the customers or users in an impersonal way, and his or her performance is very, very low, and he or she is perfectly aware of that, we can have a hint of that person suffering from burnout syndrome. Okay, so this was my presentation for the last session of today. We have talked a little bit about the main stressor nowadays, which is job stress. Of course, we could have extended the session to talk about burnout also in more detail, but I didn't want to kill you all on Friday, and this would be a topic for another whole lecture. Maybe one day we can recover and retake these sessions and talk about burnout and other topics of interest in organizational psychology. But this was all about that I wanted to talk about in this session and also in this week. In this case, I wanted to say goodbye to you by giving you a little bit more of information about me, about where I come from. So you can locate me a little bit more on the map, and also you get my contact if you want to write me for any reason, if you want to have any of the references that I gave you. I think you are going to get the slides from the institution anyway, but any case, if you want to have additional information, you can write me. We can discuss anything. I come from the Universidad Isabel I. In English, it will be University Isabel I or something like that. From Castilla or Castile, a region in Spain. You can see the building in the top left side of the screen. In the map on the right, you can see where it is located. In the city of Burgos, which is on the map of Spain, you can see where it is a little bit better, so you can locate it a little bit better. You can see the Cathedral of Burgos, which is a very representative building of our city in Spain, of the Gothic architecture, which is very nice in the middle of the Camino of Santiago, the path of Santiago, the peregrination path. Very interesting place. If you come one day, maybe you can write to me, and I can show you around, no problem. You have here my profile of LinkedIn. You can find me as my full name, as you can see there, Jorge Magdaleno Marco. And you also see my email, jorge.magdaleno, I don't know how to say in English, ui1.s. This is my institutional email. Okay, if you want to raise a question about today's presentation, or maybe about another presentation of the week, or if you have anything you want to ask about any of the things that we have commented or something related, you are free to raise your hand. Also, thanks again the institution, the Open University of Cyprus, for hosting me. Robert Duval, especially because he has taken care of me the whole week, and also taking care of the technical difficulties that we have found, especially the first day. So thanks everyone for coming. If you have any questions, I hear you, or I see the questions that you write on the chat. Okay, then, if you don't have any question, I think we can close the session. We can start saying goodbye now in a different way. I think that Robert Duval wants to close the session properly. So, Robert, please.
Yeah. Well, in turn from the part of we have comments on the chat. We will be reading them. From my part, I just want to thank Professor Magdaleno Marco for coming all the way from Burgos, which is very far north in Spain, all the way to Cyprus to give us this very interesting series of lectures. I hope you enjoy them as much as I did. All the sessions were recorded except for yesterday that we lost 10 minutes. All the sessions were recorded. So if you are a student of the Management Technology and Quality Program, the UTP program, you already have access to the recordings of the session because they are in the Epikinonia UTP class that you have access to. If you are from a different program, feel free to ask Erato for the recordings of each session. And the same goes for the presentations. The presentations, if you have access to the Epsilon UTP website, you can download them from the Blackboard room. But if you are from a different program, you just ask them from Erato, and also you can ask for your certificate of participation. We want to thank you that you were with us all these 4 days. We have a very rich participation of students. Next time, hopefully, we will also some of you in place here, and we will also come to our building. But it was a true pleasure, and I hope that you find these presentations as useful as I did. Thank you very much, and I wish you a good week.
Thank you very much.